Hello, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me, right? Just
Yep,
a
sounds
simple,
great.
yes, thank you, thank you. Again, hello, everyone, and welcome. So let me start by thanking everyone to take their time today and join today's sessions. My name is Giulio Astori. I'm a product manager at the Microsoft, specifically for Defender for Cloud. And in today's sessions, we are going to talk about what's new in the Microsoft Defender CSPM, specifically what are the latest enhancements that have landed in the past few months, starting pretty much in November 2025 until now. So let me set a little bit expectations. This is not a real generic what is the cloud security posture management sessions, right? So we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on the context, but we are going to focus specifically today on the latest changes in the CSPM and kind of like exposure management capability. That will include how attack path analysis has been reimaged, how prioritization now focus on internet exposed entry points, and how the new internet exposure improvements like the trusted networks and the exposure width metrics have helped teams to reduce risk more precisely. We will have a demo towards the end, and then obviously after the demo, there will be time for questions or Q&A basically, but you're free to jump on the chat and ask questions during the sessions. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and jump right in it. So over the past couple of years, pretty much, we have seen two major accelerators when it comes to risks. And those happening pretty much almost at the same time. The very first is the latest one, which is the adoptions of AI. AI adoption is exploding. It's everywhere, and the pace of such adoption is super fast, to the point that nearly every organization is one way or the other investing heavily into artificial intelligence, and they are building new AI-enabled apps, agents, so on and so forth. The other major accelerators, which is also pre-AI sort of thing, is the cloud is continuously expanding. Okay, that's just a fact. Customers are now no longer use one single provider, but very much so they're going to use multiple provider. So, this notion of multi-cloud, it's not just a small percentage, but it's pretty big. Most organizations, as I say, are not running just one place. They have workloads spread across Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and any other clouds. And on top of that, also through different DevOps environment as well. So, what's happening due to those major acceleration? Well, number one, the attack surface has grown continuously. All right, new services appear faster than the actual security team can track, and the same security teams right now are kind of forced to manage the risk across environment that are changing on a daily basis. And while the tool, the organization have invested is going up in terms of the number of accidents also are going up. And that's exactly why the whole world of CSPM, the cloud security posture management, also continues to evolve. So in this slide, let's walk a little bit over a few things that we highlighted through our interviews or conversations with our customers. When we interview our customers, either direct customers or in general, we constantly hear, obviously we hear a lot of stuff, but out of those, we constantly hear those four challenges. Visibility is one of the most challenge that the customer has reported. Most of the teams within a customer still don't have a complete view of what exists across the entire cloud estate, right? It doesn't matter if it's just one cloud provider. Actually, today we have multiple ones. So imagine it's really more complicated. And then where is the real exposure, or where the real exposure are? So visibility is one of the main pillar of here. And the impact, as you see from the slides, missing the actual critical vulnerabilities or the critical weaknesses. Then we have the second challenge, which is about attacks are becoming sophisticated on a daily basis. The modern pattern is rarely a single isolated vulnerabilities. Now attacks are typically chain multiple conditions together, like a misconfigurations, perhaps, or a vulnerability, plus an identity permissions, plus a level of movement. So they kind of chain together those multiple security weaknesses or condition, and then the sophistication attack as becoming how do you say more complicated than before, and that basically generates the fact that a lot of sensitive data gets exposed because due to the breach. Then you have the notion of the fast pace when it comes to developing services, developing applications. In any organization nowadays, their mantra is building faster than ever, right? They're shipping like hundreds of application and services, and they are created and changed constantly. Not only created, but changed constantly. Okay, obviously, with more apps on that fast pace, something gets missed on the way, creating more attack surface for the malicious groups. And then finally have the notion of security in silos, right? Even when security teams detected the risk, it's kind of hard to respond quickly because more often the ownership is split across different teams or different tools, right? So now the key statement is, if I want you, the key that I want you to remember is that many attack paths, meaning the path that actually lead to a meaningful impact, are enabled by all those, are conditioned by those major factors. Okay. Here we have also the notion of the internet exposure. Okay. And that's basically what has found, as you see in the slide, that 84% of attack are results of some sort of like internet exposure. Okay. So at the end of the day, exposing a workload to the internet is one of the #1 factor that leads to a further breach on the line. So let's make a little bit this thing like a real with a small scenario, right? So imagine you have now a container that is hosting a critical applications. That container is exposed to the internet, and maybe it's exposed on the internet intentionally, okay, or maybe not. Maybe it's exposed unintentionally. All right. Well, guess what? If it's a service that provides some kind of like it's an application that provides some kind of service to the customers, maybe it is intentionally exposed, right? Well, that container, like in this picture, also has a high severity vulnerability that can allow remote exploitations. Well, An attacker now finds the public endpoint and works to exploit it, finally gets control of the container. And now what they are once they are inside, because now at the point they are inside of your environment, from there, they don't stop. They look for what they can reach next, right? Lateral movement. That's basically always kind of be the story. Like they discover that the container has now a managed identity, and that identity has permissions, maybe more that he should, right? And again, there can be some misconfiguration that was intentionally left by mistake, or maybe was done precisely because it needs to access something else. Well, now guess what? The attacker can escalate the privileges of such service and start moving laterally. Eventually, by moving laterally, the attacker can have a clear understanding of the other environment, and maybe he's able to find a storage account, like in this picture, that contains sensitive data. So, and then at the end of the day, access the storage account allows the attacker to gain so much business content, let's say, okay? So in many organizations today, also that storage account, due to the AI, may not only contain sensitive data, it could also contain, let's say, grounding data for AI, okay? So at that point, the malicious person not only gets all the sensitive data, but it's also becoming to poison the model behind the AI, and that will cause more problems besides getting the data, lead to reputational damage, compliance exposure, so on and so forth. I mean, what looks like a simple one component, is a container expose the internet, becomes a full breach chain, right? And this is exactly where the Defender for Cloud Defender CSPM is designed to proactively, proactively presented as possible security weaknesses, okay? So it's designed to actually allow the end user to break the chain at the start of the entry point and stop the attacker for reaching that critical assets that we have over here, storage account, with not only sensitive data, but also AI grounding. So now let's get into what actually has changed compared to several months ago at the beginning when we had a tech path, all right? Today, we are able to better prioritize those attack paths with more, by providing higher precision on the exposure, public exposure, okay? Because the notion of having visibility of all attack path is good, but it creates a way too much fatigue. So the attack path has been reimaged, okay, in the past few months. And that is one of the most important change when it comes to Defender CSPM and attack path, because now we are prioritizing on attack path with the highest likelihood of exploitation. And that means focusing on the internet exposure entry points first, okay? The other thing is that we changed is the internet exposure improvement itself. Not only now the attack paths are going to generate those very much more likely type of attack chains, but we now also, because we focus on the internet exposure entry points, we decide to improve how we elaborate the logic behind internet exposure. One of the ask that came from customer is, how can I be able to tell that some of those networks are indeed good known network? All right. So what we did, we introduced enhancement that will allow you to have a better control over the exposure or internet exposure, and will definitely reduce the noise. And those two things that we introduced are, once the trusted network whitelisting, and the other ones is the exposure with metrics. Now, also we did it. We provided a stronger operational insight. We have improved the contextualization of the risk signal so that the security team can make a better decisions, or actually I should say a faster decision with fewer tools. So the goal at the end of the day is to improve visibility, allowing the end user to filter very quickly to those areas that are most important. So I talked about attack path improvements, right? So the attack path, so the slides is before and after, basically. The attack path, when we came out with the attack path with Defender CSPM, with Defender for Cloud, ever since we came out with the attack path analysis, that specific type of service has been a valuable service for all the cast for a long time, because they, we're able to show the risk from the attacker's point of view, from the attacker's perspective. But one of the biggest challenge that the customer had before the new changes, which we obviously learned from feedbacks and stuff, was that, okay, I see 50, 100, 200 possible path. Okay, but which one do I actually fix first? All right. Yeah, there were ways, to prioritize based on the criticality, all of that. So before, the attack path could feel kind of like overwhelming. And believe I have customers, like a large customer, where it's not about 50 or 100, couple of hundred attack path. They actually had a 1,000, 2,000 attack path, because the customer is global and have several environments, not only in Azure, but also through AWS and GCP. So imagine if you have thousands of those paths, how your team will feel very overwhelmed, because there was not always a clean prioritization signal. All right. So we decided to do that improvement by imaging, kind of like reconstruct or refactor a little bit the logic behind the attack path. And we emphasize now, today, we emphasize a signal that actually try to reflect a real world exploitability. And as I say early through the challenge, one of the biggest exploitability is the internet exposure. So that's the first thing that gets, I guess, like the easiest thing that could be find as exposure, as a work endpoint to be exploited, right? So now we have we prioritize, we emphasize the internet exposure, the reachability, also, how wide it would be the radius of this blast, right? How, if it gets breached, how widely it can go through, and impact on the sense of the resource. Okay, so with this change basically makes the experience, I guess, much more actionable. All right, now instead of a long list of complex graphs, you just get a short list of paths you can actually act on first. All right. So why prioritize internet entry point? Well, because attackers don't start by searching for the most sensitive storage account. No, they will start with what they can reach, right? And what they can reach, it's often an exposure VM, an exposure container, just like an example, or a misconfigured endpoint for such, right? A workload with weak or missing hardening, an access control surface allows movement. So, our recommended remediation order becomes like, okay, at this point, close or reduce the entry point exposure, break that sort of like lateral movement opportunity, and reduce the privilege and identity risk. And at the end of the day, all that to protect your crown jewel, like sensitive data stores or anything similar to that. Okay, so the order that I just gave it to you sounds kind of like obvious, right? When you say it, right? But it is not how, it's not really like how many teams operate today, because they are actually drawing a recommendation. So having this change, we finally, reduce much of the fatigue on work on many of those. All right. So let's step back for just 1 minute a little bit, because Defender CSPM, for those probably that are maybe not familiar, is part of Defender for Cloud. All right. So Defender for Cloud, it's a CNAPP solutions. It's a full cloud native application protection platform, security solution. And Defender for Cloud provides a full unified security across the major stack, Azure, AWS, and GCP. Supports both agent-based, agentless approaches. Defender CSPM perhaps is agentless. Okay. And then on top all that, allows it to have a full advanced threat protection with several threat protection plan that are able to protect, obviously, workloads like VMs, storage accounts, containers, applications, AI, and then we also allow to move that security visibility right into the application lifecycle. So here, this slides like try summarize a little bit, our offer, like as a unified cloud security. As you can see, you have the runtime protections, you have practice security, and on the bottom you have a unified platform that spreads across all the three major clouds. Not only that, through also the to the pipelines environment. I'm sorry, the DevOps environment. Okay, as I said, it's agent-based, but also agentless. Agentless. We have plans on the protections base that use agent, and it's built in, natively to integrating many of the worldwide security controls. So, prioritize the risk that matters the most. Okay, so the idea is that once you have all those recommendations, all those attack path, okay, you need something to very quickly prioritize in order to act fast, right? In a large environment, like the problem is exactly this, okay, is that we have too much information, okay, we have thousands of findings, but you also have a limited time, you also have a limited engineering manpower, and then the other problem is that those environments constantly changing, okay? So the CSPM has to do more than generate recommendations and generate the actual attack path, okay? It has to help you to assess the risk like an attacker would, focus on what leads to impact, and continuously re-rank as the conditions behind it will changes, okay? So for that, we provide multiple visibility through our portal that you can use in order to do that prioritization on a daily basis. Okay, this is just a snapshot of one of our views, but I'm going to go into a demo pretty soon. So when it comes to internet exposure enhancement, what we improved is a more complete and accurate detections of the internet exposure, okay? And we also improved how to reduce the false positive by providing better context when we see specific recommendation leading to a possible attack chain, okay? And then through that, by reducing the number of findings or reducing to what is actually most important, you are now able to better prioritize your remediations. Okay, so Defender now will help you to answer what is actually exposed at this moment. What is the exposure intended to be, and how wide such exposure is? And the end, what is the where this exposure will lead? Okay, to the highest of those attack path in terms of impact. So one thing that we enhance, as I said earlier, is the ability to whitelisting those trust network. Now, if we are primarily focused on what really can be exposed, or what really is can be easily exposed, meaning like those exposing to the public network, well, guess what? As I say earlier, we need to make sure that we improve such exposure engine, right? And the very first thing that we were told to do is reduce the noise about those networks, okay? Because, you know, because at the end of the day, not all networks are malicious, right? Okay, and the customer told us, well, Defender says it's internet exposed, but we actually expected that traffic because it is behind, let's say, an approved gateway or corporate IP ranges, all right? But before we did the changes, in reality is that, you know, quote unquote, like external-ish IP range was considered just public exposure, but now it says, no, it's not. It is, but it is, it's a trusted one. So the trusted network now will allow the customers, the security team, to define the known, the approved network ranges so that the system can reduce the distraction. And obviously with sharpened prioritization when it comes down to the to that visibility, okay? And the result is very simple. I mean, at the end of the day, you're gonna get a less noises, more precisions, and faster remediation. And this is specifically, especially valuable when a team has to prioritize exposure reduction very quickly, because you want the top of the list to contain the truly untrusted entry point. Now, how do you do that? Well, basically, right now it's still in public preview, the trusted network or whitelisting. And then there is actually a policy, and I will show basically even on during the demo, but it's a policy. So there's a policy you can get it on our GitHub that allows you to set those what do you call those whitelisted IP, okay? Then the other thing that we did in order to emphasize more of the exposure and reduce the noise and everything is the exposure width, okay? The exposure width is another key improvement here. So not all the exposure are equal, all right? Maybe two resources could be both exposed in the internet, but one of the resource could be wide open, and the other might be could be only reachable from a narrow set of IPs or ports, right? So the exposure width gives you more nuance than the original binary signal that was like, oh, it's exposed, yes or no, once it's 0. So now it will help you to have a better context when you evaluate one set of resources versus the other, or one attack path versus the other, because now you can prioritize based on how broadly the reachability is, okay, how likely the exploitation is, and at that point, how urgently you should respond, right? Because that's part of the end game. You want to respond as quickly as possible before it gets too late, and then the malicious person is already inside your environment. So if now when you have a long list exposure, right? So Defender CSPM with this exposure with metric will help you to focus on the exposure that are truly dangerous, rather than chasing every single one, every single public endpoint equally. One other enhancement that we did that it's new to Defender CSPM is now that Defender for Cloud in general is integrated within the security.microsoft.com portal, which is basically the XDR portal. Okay, that integration is still in public preview, basically, and now Defender for Cloud, now that is deeply integrated into Defender portal experience, you can see you can view posture across multiple environment, prioritize the exposure risk better, because now you have a more context, including other signal coming from identities being protected and evaluated through XDR. Same thing from the devices itself as well, through the XDR and Defender for Endpoint, or even the application to Defender for Cloud apps and stuff like that. And also on top of that, you have the notion exposure management, which is a CTM, basically, what you call platform, right? And obviously, you can respond with a more consistent workflow, all right? So with this integration, obviously, for this integration to work, you need obviously Defender CSPM, because it will allow to bring over, the risk analysis, besides the assets itself and the vulnerability, but the risk analysis, the attack path, and obviously the notion of the risk associated with the overall security posture. So I'm going to actually, I'm going to very quickly do a demo here. So number one, I want to very quickly show you this integration, the XDR, okay? So the integration in the XDR, which is public available to everyone right now, allows you to have this additional section called Cloud Security. Under the Cloud Security, you have the overview. So what's different now in this view, okay? Well, you have a security posture score, Cloud Security score. Then you're also familiar in terms of naming and concept from the regular Defender for Cloud in the portal. But there is a big difference right now when it comes to XDR. So in the XDR, this score is now what I call risk-based, okay? So the 48.4% is calculated not on the single notion of that you have X amount of assets compared to a list of security control, which we call recommendations. And then when compared to those recommendations, some of those resources are compliant, healthy, other are not compliant, and then non-compliance or not healthy defines the traditional secure score, which is available in the Azure portal for today time. But this one is now calculated on the fact that resources are not equally at the same security risk level. Even if they have the same misconfigurations, there are other factors that are considered based on on those that those resources are evaluated, and those factors will increase or decrease the risk level of the resource itself when resource is at risk, basically, right? There are plenty of risks, right? There are one, obviously, the resource has vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, or vulnerabilities. It's one level of risk. If the resource is exposed on the internet, it's a different level of risk. If the resource could possibly allow lateral movement, or if it has a secrets, or if it has it's considered, if it's been considered a critical resources, because I am the end user that know these resources. For me, that resource is important, I label as a critical resource, then obviously the risk level will bump up, because to me it's important as a resource. The other thing can be that the resource has a secrets, sensitive data on, all right? So this is a new formulated score, secure score, cloud secure score. And then I like to call based on the risk. If you look at the cloud initiative, particularly here, you can see the overview, you can see the security recommendations in terms of misconfigurations and vulnerabilities and exposed secrets. So when it comes to recommendations, very easy to use vulnerabilities, generically speaking, all right? Because vulnerability can be translated as weaknesses, but in reality, in our context, vulnerabilities are the typical CVEs, right? Okay, VMs have the vulnerabilities, containers have the vulnerabilities, application has those vulnerabilities. Misconfiguration a little bit different. Like misconfiguration can be, well, this endpoint exposed to the internet, it can be a misconfiguration, or this endpoint does not have the specific configuration that is recommended in our security in the world, in the global standard best practices. Exposed secrets, it's basically something that we introduce as evaluating agentlessly, the servers and stuff, and then or storage or database, and like you can easily forget some secrets on the server, like maybe a connection strings, or even like an SSH key, stuff like that, right? So those are secure recommendations. Then you have obviously attack path. But if you look at the overview, now you have the actions in the new secure score, which is in preview public. And if you want to understand a little bit more here, the context, that is a what do you call a little bit explanations on the formula over here. So now the key aspect of this new calculated formula, calculated score, is that we use right now the criticality of the risk. Okay, so this is the actual formula. There is the documentation as well on the public side. You can take a look, but it's a bit different from our traditional one, which we still have in our portal inside of the Azure, which eventually over here will change as well. Okay. The other thing that I want to highlight over here is that not only you see the score, but also see the change in the trend. Like here, you see there is a negative of 4.4% that went down basically from what was before. This is based on 7 days analysis. So different from our traditional secure score environment here. Inside of Defender XDR, we retain data up to 6 months. Because we retain data up to 6 months, you're able to see on a timeline how the score has changed, and then obviously have the delta, on a time frame, on time period that you decide to analyze. Okay, that's basically one of the major changes we made when now that we integrated Defender for Cloud into the XDR when it comes to evaluate the score of your environment. It's the fact that we now introduce the risk. And in order to do that, obviously you have to have Defender CSPM enabled. Okay. Now, so when it comes to Defender CSPM, for those that are new to Defender for Cloud, the whole thing starts inside of the Azure portal. Inside the Azure portal, you have Defender for Cloud. You just search it basically if you don't find it, but it's like it is in the services. And then by default, this Defender for Cloud, as today, is enabled basically providing the basic understanding of the cloud security posture for the Azure subscription within that tenant. So really, there is not much that you need to do, at least for the basic posture management, which is for free. We call that foundational CSPM. There is nothing you really need to do. I mean, I'm going to show you my environment where I have more permission so that, yeah, because over here it's hard to see what's on and off. So here, basically, as you can see, the free, it's already on, okay, nothing to do, but then you do need to enable Defender CSPM. There's a big difference between the two. So the free only allows continuous access of the security configurations for those cloud resources, and those cloud resources can be Azure, AWS, and GCP. It allows you to give you to see the security recommendation, how to fix those misconfiguration, vulnerability, or weaknesses, and then you have the secure score summarizing the security aspects of that environment or environments. If you have multiple environments, we'll aggregate that score. With the Defender CSPM, we have plenty things, right? We have agentless scanning for vulnerabilities, secrets. Obviously, have one of the main thing, which is attack path analysis, risk prioritization, risk hunting through Security Explorer. You have a code to cloud, which is basically DevSecOps kind of stuff. Internet exposure analogy, which is the one I just explained. We have permission management, also known as scheme, regulatory compliance, integration with third party like TSMs, governance options to create like remediation actions, and others and others. All right. Obviously, there is a full support for devices, applications. When it comes to application, we also provide the support for container-based application, for serverless-based applications, for AI services, agent, basically AI assets, and API as well. Now, when you enable it at the main toggle, if you have the right permissions, will allow you to pretty much enable everything automatically. Now, there are a couple of things that are still in preview that you need to manually enable. You don't see AI over here because enable automatically. You really have to do anything over here. If you don't have the right permission, you might don't see some of those are being enabled because it requires some specific configuration behind the scene that probably your role doesn't have it. So, but typically with the subscription owner, you should be able to do everything. But typically, it's always recommended to go back into the actual plan and see if everything is enabled. As I say early, there are a couple of things like API security posture management and serverless protection. There are by default off, so you have to do you have to toggle on enable in order to do that. You have to do manually. We're working right now to generate the policies, and so we can do that via Azure policies or via API. If API is your preference mode. Once you do that, then obviously you have all the recommendations coming up inside of this one queue view. We call one queue, and under these recommendations right now, you basically see recommendation per resources. So you can actually go ahead and look for each of the resources individually, see all the recommendation. Oh, if you just want to group it by title, so like, okay, let me see all the resources they are, let's say, not very healthy on the storage account, should be prevented, shared, one of those things. Like here, you can do that and you can see which ones are not, okay? So there are two ways to evaluate, to filter the view. So now, when I say early, the attack path has changed a lot. So if I go into attack path analysis, previously there were probably maybe others attack path, okay? But now, I don't know if I can quantify how many more could have been, but right now, as you can see, everything it is being calculated by a entry point that is exposed publicly, okay? So if I look at the very first one, this is basically a case where I have a server that is exposed through two IPs, and through that exposure, because the virtual machine has a what do you call high vulnerabilities, and then you can see which ones are those vulnerabilities. And because this virtual machine has also been configured as a managed entity, which has a role or permission to access the storage account, guess what? This is basically a typical path where someone can exploit this vulnerability, run some scripts to emulate the service account on the system, and through that access the storage account. Now, the one thing that I want to highlight of the storage account, number one, the storage account has sensitive data. There are some social security number, credit card, employee ID, so that's sensitive data, okay? The other thing I want to highlight over here, there is an icon of it. It's a crown jewel, right? So this icon identifies this resource as a critical resource, and that's critical resource by defined by the customer based on the rule. Okay, you as a customer can basically go inside of the environment setting, and through the integration of the XDR exposure management, basically this one, you can set a resource criticality. I don't have a sufficient, okay. All right, doesn't look like I have a permissions here, but basically here, I will have a link. So let me see if I have them over here. I don't think so, but I have a link that will take me to the settings inside of, well, I don't even have permissions here. Maybe let's see if I can show you here. I forgot where is this thing. Totally forgot about why I don't have the. Well, in long story short, we'll take you to a place in here where you can actually set the rule by which identify either specific resources by name, by tag, or even like a rule, generic rule, like if there is an asset that sensitive data, you can consider asset critical, or simply because I have the server and I can say like the server is known as critical, and I just use the name of that. Once you do that, not only you see the crown jewel here, but you can also have in the asset inventory coming up into like here, like this SQL 1 server is a critical asset. This would grow Kubernetes service. It's also a critical asset. So once you set basically those critical assets, there are plenty of critical assets, and they are basically set by rule. And once you do that, that just critical tag, okay, will bump up the criticality if something it is not configured right to that resource. I think we have 10 minutes to the end, so I'm going to go ahead and bring one last slide. So what do you do if you want to take any key takeaways from here at the end is that well, basically if we want to create a very small, short day-to-day workflow when it comes to have a full visibility and act upon this security posture management, well, we can basically say that number one, you start with the internet exposure by identifying, focus on the entry points first, right? So because those the ones that will definitely will be breached at the beginning, and that's where the whole thing was started, okay? The second thing is reduce nodes. So by using trusted network, so basically by able to filtering with whitelisting, and then by having more visibility in the depth of that, now you can focus on the true untrusted exposure. You follow the attack path by understanding what the exposure can reach and what is the actual blast radius, if it exists or not, how far can it go into the breach by moving through the, laterally. And then you obviously need to remediate quickly, but also you need to remediate in the right order, okay? You know the entry points, you know the movement, you know if there is privilege, if there is sensitive assets, and then attack path gives you the options to know which one, which is a choke point that can be remediated in order to break the whole chain. Finally, you want to confirm that the exposure reduced, the paths are broken, and obviously the posturing is improved. This is not obviously, a full end-to-end process. It's just like, few steps that I want to leave you with. It's a small workflow that will, allow you to, will take the regular CSPM from just being a dashboard or recommendation to a consistent operational program. With this, basically, I can say like we finished the sessions, and the last few minutes we can go over. I know that a lot of questions already asked and answered, but if there are any more questions, I'm happy to answer lively.
Thanks, Giulio. Yes, it looks like almost all of our questions have already been answered in the chat. So if folks have any new questions that they want to send through, please do so now. We can answer them verbally. It looks like one just came through that says, what is the best way to understand which Defender for Cloud Server, P2, CWPP, and CSPM features are applicable for on-prem server with Azure Arc?
Okay, so when it comes to Defender for Cloud Services, let me bring, if I may, the, what is it? Here, probably let me bring this over here, that. So, oops. When it comes to the on-prem services that can be managed through the Azure Arc, the only thing that we currently support to Defender for Cloud, it's servers, okay? Arc, basically, it's used to take that server and provision it as an Azure resource. And through that, you basically can leverage the server plan, P2 perhaps, or P1. However, with the P2, you have some capabilities of the plan itself. They're not applicable when it comes down to what do you call when it comes down to the resource on-prem. Okay, one of those is perhaps the agentless options to scan the server without actually have the agent on the server itself, right? So the only options you have the MDE that needs to basically be installed, so on and so forth. But other than that, pretty much you have almost all the obviously, because the agentless brings secret scanning and agentless malware detection, everything that is basically correlated to the agentless capabilities, you don't get it for the on-prem, but everything else you get it. Okay, so at that point, yeah, you can select the P2 because P2 gives you also a couple of things that you need, like FIM and stuff like that. But then, yeah, most likely you can go either that or, like many customer does, select the plain P1 because it's pretty much plain MDE, and it's based.
Great, thanks, Giulio. And it looks like that was our last question. All the other questions have been answered in the chat. So thank you so much for being our guest today and for sharing all of the great information with our community. And thank you to all the folks on the call who have been helping with questions that came through on the back end. To all of the listeners that are still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/security-community. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. If you have any other additional questions on the topic we covered today or any other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them at aka.ms/mdc-community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.